Welcome to the Costa Rica Travel and Living Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Baker. I'm a British expat that's been living and working here in Costa Rica since 2006, so I know a thing or two about this part of the world. This is the podcast where I chat with a number of colleagues and friends of the expat community around Costa Rica to provide you with top tips and insights into either your next trip to Costa Rica, or perhaps if you're thinking about the big move in coming to live down here, this is the podcast for you. So make sure to subscribe to never miss a weekly episode. My guest this week is Madeline Higgingson. She originally came over from the UK and London nearly 10 years ago in 2014. They migrated with their 2 kids and have been living here ever since. I have a great conversation with Madeline about living in the region of Santa Ana, a rural town just 20 minutes away from San Jose. We discuss what it's like living there, raising her kids, traveling around the region, as Madeline is a travel consultant now with Costa Rican Vacations. So, without further ado, let's jump in. Hello, Madeline. How's it going? Good to have you on the show. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Adam. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks. It's just started raining outside. Typical Costa Rica weather in October, nice and wet afternoons, but hopefully it won't interrupt us too much.
Hopefully not. Can you hear the thunder and lightning out there?
No, yeah, I can hear it right. My office is in the center of my house, so it's okay. I've got a couple of walls before the rain gets to us, but hopefully it won't be too loud.
Excellent.
Well, as ever, with our Travel and Living Costa Rica podcast, I would love to hear a little bit, Madeline, about how your Costa Rica adventure began.
Sure. Well, I must be one of the luckiest people alive. We were living in the UK, my husband and I, who had 2 small children. And one day my husband's boss called up and said, "Would you like a transfer to Costa Rica?" And of course we said yes. 3 weeks later, we were on the plane over here, and 9 years later, we're still here. So
Wow.
How lucky am I?
There you go. That's a pretty solid summary. What line of work was your husband in to get that call?
He was working in financial services in London.
Okay.
So Canary Wharf to
Oh, wow.
Costa Rica. There you
That's
go.
a big change from the business district of London all the way over here.
It's a very big change. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, he works for a big international company, and yeah, we were very lucky to get that transfer.
What was the immediate thinking about? You said 3 weeks. That's a very quick turnaround time. So why immediately yes? Had you done much research on Costa Rica?
No, it's funny, because I'd lived abroad before. I lived in Australia for a while, and then as a family, we'd thought about, trying to make the move abroad, and we'd considered Asia and some of the, more common places. And then, that my husband got the call from his boss. He said, "I'd love to go. I'm sure my wife's going to say yes." And of course I did. And then 3 weeks later, that was our look and see trip. So, very common, as with most kind of expat kind of contracts. You get a chance to come and see the country, check it out, make sure you like it. I don't think saying no was really an option, but luckily we did really love it. And so we went back to the UK, packed up our things, and then 6 weeks after that look and see trip, we were coming over here with our kids. And yeah, here we are to this day.
That's amazing. So how long is that look and see trip process? How long were you here?
We were here for 2 weeks. So very, very fortunately. Yeah, exactly. 1 week in San Jose, which is where we still live. And you're given an agent who helps show you around, shows you real estate, shows you schools, shows you hospitals. Make sure that you're happy with your choices. We looked around probably about 50 homes within 3 or 4 days. And actually picked out the house we were going to live in. And yeah, went to several schools, looked around those, and chose the one that we liked the most. And yeah, after that, we went to the beach. And our first beach trip was up to Samara. And what an introduction to Costa Rica.
That's incredible. This is the great thing about this podcast, having to chat to loads of friends and colleagues all over the country. I'm always amazed at how different people's stories are that got them here. And I'll ask you the same question at the end of the podcast. I'll always ask, what is the one thing that you would recommend for people coming to Costa Rica? And a lot of the tips are, make sure you come and visit the country before. It's obviously a big cultural change. And that's the most common tip. But usually if you can stay longer, 4 weeks, a month or 2 months. So I imagine in 2 weeks, that's a good vacation time, right? But that's also not a massive time to kind of get to know the people and get to know the culture and how the day-to-day works, as much as it is to know the geography, the lay of the land, the kind of styles of the houses, the homes. I like to think that this podcast in a small way does what your agent does and give people a very small insight into maybe the hospitals, the housing situation, the expat communities, how the schooling system works, etc. Did when you said yes and you've stayed for Costa Rica, so you were here for 2 weeks and you liked it a lot, was there an idea that you would only be here for a certain number of years?
We thought we were coming for a year and a half, 2 years when we first came.
Okay.
So we ended up sort of staying for 3-4 years, and then we loved it so much we kind of localized and become local employees and things here. So
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think you're making a really, really valid point there, which is, a lot of people who come down to visit, they come as a tourist, but, getting into the mindset of what's it actually going to be like to live here, that's very, very different. And, you really do need to think about, what medical services am I going to need? What education do my kids want? Do I really want to be living at the beach where it's super, super hot and I can't really do too much?
Yeah.
Or do you want a more urban environment where there's more happening? Because, as we all know, some parts of Costa Rica are pretty remote.
Yes.
And they don't have the services that we're all used to in Europe or in the US.
So true. Yeah, yeah. What would you say was one or two of the key reasons you turned that 1.5, 2 year trip into 4 years and now 9 years?
Well, I had 2 small children when we moved here. My kids were 1 and 3. And I just saw what a wonderful place Costa Rica is to grow, for kids to grow up.
Yeah.
Children here have a real childhood. They spend time outdoors. It's a very innocent life, very family orientated, which I know sounds weird because I don't have family here, but it's very much socializing within the family and with other families. And that was a key thing for me. And also the education they're getting here is absolutely amazing. I'm really, really happy with it.
Yeah. No, it's a really valid point. I think, obviously we're both from the UK. Not that we're a particularly cold nation, but I do think that warmth of family and that family unity, especially in Latin America in general, is very strong here. My daughter was born just under a year ago, and I'm really excited for her to grow up here for all of those reasons you mentioned. And then obviously have the trips back to, in my case, the UK to see the UK side of the family.
Yeah.
But just living up the access to outdoors, good education, the things that you can do and see. It's a very diverse country, right, geographically as well as people. So there's a lot of opportunity for the kids.
Absolutely. That's so right. That's so right.
Yeah.
And, arriving into Costa Rica, the first thing you notice is very often, you're seen to the front of the queue at passport control because you have children.
Yeah.
They really prioritize people with kids. You go to a restaurant and you don't get people tutting and, if your baby's crying, people are welcoming and they love kids. And that's really important to me. So.
Yeah, for sure. How did you make the decision for the schools? How did you do a lot of research? Did you see a lot of schools? Obviously, they were quite young when you moved. So I guess you had a little bit more time knowing that you were going to stay longer to do your research in and around. Obviously, you're based in Santa Ana. So, one of the nicer little suburbs outside of San Jose, maybe by 15, 20 minutes. Was that the reason you based yourself there, or?
Well, I knew about Santa Ana. I knew it was a really nice, it's a small market town that's kind of been assumed into consumed into San Jose now, but it's a beautiful place. There's quite a few expats here. We've got a huge variety of schools around here.
Yeah.
So, one of the big benefits, as well as kids having a great childhood, is there's amazing bilingual education. Yeah. So we're not just talking about, learning English or Spanish a couple of hours a week. My kids have half their classes in Spanish, half their classes in English.
Yeah.
And I looked at a lot of schools, and there are so many considerations when you come down to language, depending on the age of your kids, if they speak Spanish, how long you're going to be here for. Because, for example, the school I picked, my kids were really young, so they were starting at the beginning, and it was full Spanish immersion.
Nice.
So they had full Spanish from day 1, age 3. And that was a really funny thing. A lot of my friends in England said, "Aren't you worried how your daughter's going to adapt?" He never mentioned it once. She didn't even acknowledge the fact that people were speaking different languages. She just picked up the language. And of course, now they're both bilingual. So what a great skill to have.
No, for sure. And they're speaking English with you at home, obviously.
They do, yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm in the process of the same thing, trying to speak to my daughter in English while my wife, being from Venezuela, speaks Spanish. But then, of course, there's a lot of sweet things as well to say in Spanish. So you really mix it up. Obviously, she's very young. Which school do your kids go to in Santa Ana?
They go to Blue Valley School.
Blue Valley.
So, yeah.
It'd be really interesting, and I think we need to do a deeper dive into all the schools in the area. We're trying to do a research topic at the moment to present the information about all the pros and cons of all the different schools in the Central Valley, as well as the amount of schools that are opening up as well for the expat communities along the coast. Because, of course, you do have a lot of different places to live Did you ever think about living outside the Central Valley, other than Santana, when you first came over?
No, we didn't. I mean, my husband's job is based here in
Right.
San Jose. As you know, San Jose's, you can't really be too far from where you're working.
Yeah.
When we first moved here, his office was pretty close to our house. Unfortunately, it's moved a bit further away now, but that's life. But no, I love to go to the beach. I love the mountains here in Costa Rica. I love the beach. I love the rural areas, but
Yeah.
I really want to be living where there's a good choice of schools and medical services, and of course, where work is. So
Yeah.
I'm very happy with where we are.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I'm exactly the same. I love the services. I also love the amenities. If you do like your cinema complexes, your shopping, your sports, recreational facilities, you obviously find a lot more of them here in the Central Valley. And of course, work. And like you say, access to anywhere else in the country. It's such a beating heart of Costa Rica. You're always very close to anywhere if you are
It is.
traveling out of San Jose. So it makes life a little bit easier for sure.
Exactly.
If you go back 9 years, when you first came over, you've done the sight and see trip. You've made the big move. You've packed the kids up. You've left London behind. Do you remember any cultural surprises that you didn't necessarily expect in those first few months?
Oh, I mean, it takes time to get settled down here in Costa Rica, and I
Yeah.
hadn't actually realized that culture shock is like a real physical condition.
Right.
You're learning a new language, you're taking on board a
Yeah.
new culture, you're trying to figure out how to pay your electricity bill. One of the really strange things for me coming from the UK is that in the UK, if you don't pay your bill, they send you a letter and say, you need to pay this now. Here is the onus is 100% on you to figure out what tax you need to pay, what bill you need to pay, if you got a speeding ticket or anything like that.
Yes.
And for me, that was really, really strange.
That's a
But
really good point. I guess the lack of the postal system. I live on a second floor of a condo, so the post box doesn't really exist anyway. So even if the bill did come, you're not really guaranteed that you get the letter.
exactly.
I know if you haven't paid your electricity bill, maybe within 7 to 8 days, it will flick, and if it will shut off, and then if you haven't paid it, then you have to go and sort it out anyway. So you're kind of forced to do that. That's an interesting one.
Exactly.
I hadn't thought about that, but I do remember as an expat the onus on making sure that you either manage to figure it out or get maybe a local friend or family member to
Yeah.
help you, because the process is not always that easy.
It's not, and it's so funny what you're saying about the postage system, because that's just something that we all, take for granted, isn't
Yes.
it? Being from a more developed country,
Yeah.
and here there is not really any post at all.
No.
And it was very hard for my friends and family in the UK to understand that there's no point sending a birthday card, or definitely not a parcel,
Yeah.
because I will never know if the parcel is going to come through or not.
It's that I say the same thing. I had a funny story a couple of years ago. Actually, it was before the pandemic. We may be going 6 to 7 years ago. My sister sent me a Christmas present, and it did arrive. And I tell her, expect it to take 2 or 3 weeks if it arrives. And this one got stuck in aduanas, in customs, because there was some kind of cream or chocolate product for Christmas. So I had to go to the post office on the other side of town, the central post office.
Zapote, yeah.
Not just any in Zapote, exactly. So that's an hour in traffic just to get there. And then they look at me like they know this is ridiculous. They go, if you need to sign this out, you need to get a letter from the health ministry saying that you can accept this chocolate in these tea bags. And I'm like, you're joking, right? And they give me the face of, we know this is ridiculous, but this is the way it is. The funniest thing about the story is that they kind of look at me and go, you need to fill this in, leaving me with this empty desk in a room by myself with the product and the envelope open. They leave, and I've got these big cargo pants. I'm traveling, and I grab a bunch of tea bags, put them in, grab the book, grab the chocolate, fill in the form, leave it with them, leave. I'm just going, let's go, my friend at the time. And that's such a typical Costa Rican story. Right? I got my tea bag. Nobody really cares. But you're right about the packages. You can't really guarantee anything may or may not arrive. It's very true.
Exactly.
And it does take long to kind of get used to it, especially when many of us are coming from these, like developed nations, right? Either, European countries or North America. But yeah, I guess that's part of the fun, but you do have to kind of get used to it. I remember struggling with patience at the beginning. You need to be quite patient, I think, sometimes.
It is. But, you have to remember, though, when I think about all these things, I think, well, I've come here for a more relaxed lifestyle, so I can't start getting aggravated and stressed about things that don't work exactly the same way that they work in my country.
I totally agree.
That's what we're here for. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you take that with you, that expectation, well, then that's just only going to lead down a negative path, right? Because then, why did we leave in that case? Why did we choose to stay?
Exactly.
No, that's fantastic. You mentioned the expat community. It's quite big in Santa Ana. My mother-in-law lives over there, so I spend a lot of time in Santa Ana as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Was that easy for you guys at the beginning, to immerse yourself in the expat community? Did you then try and also mix that with a more local vibe? How was it with the Spanish?
Sure. Well, I mean, I have the advantage of having kids in school, so I've met a
Yeah,
lot of local people through schools, and
yeah,
people have been very, very welcoming. Um, and when I first started off, I made a huge effort to learn Spanish because I couldn't speak Spanish at all,
yeah,
and to meet local people, to befriend, the parents of the children in my children's classes, etc. And I've got some great, great long-term friends here who are Costa Rican. But it's funny because the longer you're away from home, longer I'm away from the UK, the more
yeah,
I kind of think, actually, I do like spending time with fellow Brits. And, we organise like once a year a Guy Fawkes event. And
yeah,
if there's a football match, we'll try and get together. And,
yeah.
we do socialise with other British friends, but there's not many British people here. So just generally expats, I mean, it's a very, very rich international community, I'd say, lots of people from other Latin American countries who are all away from home as well. So,
Yeah.
it's a really good place to meet people from different backgrounds and different cultures.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I noticed the difference about I wouldn't say lack of British people living in Costa Rica, but compared to the US community or the Canadian community,
Oh,
or even the
yeah,
pockets of Italians, Argentinians, um,
exactly.
I notice it like when you meet fellow Brits here, I'm like, oh, this is great, let's get together. Or because sometimes it's few and far between. The English school, the English language school is very close to my house. The British school is down the road.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm queuing up for a subway and I can hear a bunch of English teachers with English accents, you notice and you say hello. It's very strange because it's
I
not
know.
the most common thing. Um, how did you find it relocating with kids, but then also having your kids grow up? What changes have you noticed? Obviously, you've been here for a number of years now. They speak Spanish fluently. Do
Mm.
they love going back to the UK? Do they find it a fascinating mix? Do they prefer the Costa Rica traditions? Do you introduce English ones? How does that work?
They love both. I mean, I think they feel very English, despite having spent most of their lives living in Costa Rica.
Oh,
They
okay,
still
interesting.
feel very English. Yeah. And we go back every year for a month in the summer, and they
Yeah,
love it because the weather's usually pretty nice, and they
yeah,
get rotten by our friends and family, and they can stay up late at night. It's still light. Of course,
yes,
here in Costa Rica,
yeah,
it gets dark so early. But they love their life here. They've got great friends, but they have this amazing kind of like dual thing going on. It is interesting though, because I do think that they do want to go to university or college, as they'd say, in the UK. So
yeah,
I think there is a pull for them there. So
yeah.
I feel like they've had the best of both worlds. Really, it's really nice.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, a couple of other friends here who are half Costa Rican, half European with different, Austrian, German. And that seems to be a real commonality. Growing up here in Costa Rica, having the bilingual experience, a lot of traveling, and then going abroad with the advantage of dual nationality to university back in the other connection. And I guess that way you can obviously, as you get older, right, as a kid, you get that experience, you get that choice, which is obviously a very luxurious position to be in.
Very luxurious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's very nice. Um, do you see yourself here in the long run? I'm guessing you do, but how do you see that if the kids then go back to university?
We'll just have to wait and see. I mean, who knows where life's going to take any of us, right? But
Yeah,
the plan is the kids want to graduate high school here in Costa Rica. They're at the moment thinking about wanting to study in Europe, probably the UK.
yeah,
And then I guess my husband and I just have to decide, at that stage, what do we do? Do we stay? Do we split our time? How do things work out for us? So,
yeah, yeah. Very interesting. That makes sense. I know obviously you're working in travel now. You've been with Costa Rican Vacations for a while as a travel consultant planning,
yep,
vacations around the
yep.
country. When you travel with your kids here, where are your top 3 favorite places to go? What do you guys like to do?
That's interesting. I mean, my kids now are really into the ocean. So they love to
Okay.
snorkel. They're just doing their Discovery scuba. They're
Yeah,
getting really into that. So we go quite a lot up to the kind of Papagayo area around Playa del Coco, Playa Hermosa. They really, really like it up there if we're going to go to the beaches. The
yeah,
ocean's a little bit calmer up there, so it makes for great snorkeling straight off the beach. Beautiful beaches. So yeah, that's been quite a focus for us. And there's also some really nice deserted beaches up there inside knowledge, so we like it up there. But my kids as well, they love the mountains. I mean, Monteverde is one of their favorite places. They
yeah.
love to go there because strangely enough they like cool weather. And
I was going to ask you. I mean, when I started my Costa Rica experience predominantly in Monteverde, I find myself in a minority as well, really enjoying the cool weather. One of the reasons I only live in San Jose is because it is a couple of degrees cooler throughout the year. Even
Yep.
when we go to Santana, the temperature goes, up about 5 degrees, dropping off the
Yep.
plateau here. And like, I couldn't live in Santana. You need AC the whole time, and then the electricity bill skyrockets. But like you said about the mountains, Heredia, the Poas, the coffee fields, Monteverde, it's a lot cooler. I imagine that's one of the reasons the kids like going back to the UK in the summer. Even though you got the lovely sunshine, it's not always crazy hot.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, my kids say, "Oh, we prefer cooler weather." It's funny, isn't it? The grass is always greener on the other side.
The grass is always good. Have they spent much time going back to the UK at Christmas with the cold
We
rain?
have been back a couple of times. I mean, we didn't go for many years, and
Yeah,
then just before COVID, we went back there,
yeah,
and they absolutely loved it. But they're desperate to see snow. Neither of them. I think Alice, my daughter, saw snow when she was very, very little, but they're just desperate to see snow. And I keep
yeah.
trying to explain to them, you're not guaranteed snow in England at Christmas time. Sorry,
Yes.
kids.
Then you've got to
But
wait.
yeah.
Have you planned any trips for your friends and family for the UK coming over to Costa Rica?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to be perfectly honest, before I was working in this job, getting paid to do it, I was doing it all the time
Uh-huh.
anyway. Pretty much everyone from our family has been at least 2 or 3 times. And then we've got friends that are coming back on their 3rd trip as well. So yeah, I'm constantly planning trips, constantly coming up with new destinations, constantly trying to find out ways I can get more vacation to go and join them.
Yes, of course, yeah, and get to experience the joys that is the country. No,
Exactly.
I remember doing the same thing, and obviously when you've been here for a number of years, it's nice to see it through their eyes as well. Not just the cultural lifestyle, but actually traveling around the country and remind yourself of how
Yeah,
beautiful it is. Because
it is because one does tend to take it for granted a little bit. It's once you've lived here for a while, and then people come over for the first time and they just cannot believe how beautiful it is.
yeah, no, it makes sense. I wanted to ask you, obviously coming from the UK, we do have those high expectations of some of those European things that we expect, being on time or postal service working, less bureaucracy, sometimes red tape, banking, the basic things that we take for granted.
Mm.
Was there any challenges, raising your kids here that obviously you didn't know when your kids were much younger, and as they got older, what are some of those challenges that you go, oh, this is a real pain in the ass? I wish I was momentarily back, to give people an idea of what it might be, the difficult parts of raising kids, along with all the
Raising
positives that
kids
we've
here.
discussed. Yeah, what were some of the challenges that you found?
Well, I mean, one of the challenges I found is that, Costa Rica is a very small country, and it's not like the UK where people move away to different cities and do things. So, this family orientation, being very family oriented thing,
Yeah,
can be quite difficult because many of my kids' classmates, the parents were all at school together, the play dates are with the cousins, the family live nearby. So, it can be a little bit difficult to break into that. I mean, we've done it, and,
yeah,
we've got some great Costa Rican friends, but you do feel a little bit like an outsider in that perspective. And I think that's why sometimes you do orientate more towards the international community. It doesn't have to be British, doesn't have to be an English speaking person, but someone who as well is outside their home country.
yeah. No, that's a really good point. How did you find that you broke into that? Was that just like you mentioned, speaking Spanish, doing your best to practice it, going to more events with your kids, and then meeting parents? Would you say that was the easiest thing? And was that the same for your husband in terms of colleagues at work? Did he find it different to you?
Um, I think my poor husband, I mean, he speaks English at work, so he
Right.
never gets a chance to practice his Spanish, or very rarely. But
Uh-huh.
his colleagues have been incredibly welcoming to us. I mean, we've done a lot of socializing with his colleagues, and
Yeah.
been away with them and things. And likewise, the parents in my children's classes have been really, really nice too. But, it is difficult when you're speaking a second language. However fluent you are in Spanish, it's very
Yeah.
difficult to express yourself in a second language, and, for people to really get to know the person you are.
Yeah.
So that's
No,
quite hard.
yeah, no, I can imagine. That makes sense. Before I wrap up, a couple of more questions I wanted to ask you. If you weren't living in Santa Ana, around the Central Valley, where might you also live, or where would you consider living? And if it wasn't in the Central Valley and you had to choose a coastal area, where's one of your more favored coastal regions of the country?
Well, if it's for living, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, Costa Rica is so kind of like unspoilt and undeveloped. There are very few places that really have that much like going on in terms of
Yes.
services. So, you know, Jaco, Tamarindo, maybe down towards Dominical. I mean, I love the Dominical area and the Uvita area. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Topography, the way the rainforest and the mountains come
Yeah.
down to the beach, it's absolutely stunning. And, you know, that area is getting more services and things. So, yeah, maybe around Uvita would be my first choice near the
Yeah.
beach.
Nice. We've spoken to a couple of people. It's impressive to see in the last 5 to maybe 10 years how quickly areas can get developed. Maybe not with all the services, but the initial impetus of movement, and then usually real estate gets in there first. Land is bought up, then there's houses and building, and then the amenities follow. But I know that's always sometimes the struggle is getting those amenities quick enough to build up an area to get that interest.
That's very true. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, I think even down to Dominical Vita, I think the road down there's only been paved for about 15 years.
Yes.
So it's very unspoilt down there still. It's
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful. I mean, you can walk along a beach, be on your own.
Yeah.
Absolutely stunning.
Do you think you might maybe in the future, if you say you stay in Costa Rica, your kids go to university in the UK, would you consider buying land or living in a more coastal region, or are you really very set? Do you think just for the time being in the central region?
I think for the time being, I mean, the weather at the beach is very, very hot, right?
Yes.
So, you know,
Yeah,
anything that you want to do, like you say, you need to have air conditioning. You need, you know, I'm a big tennis player.
Yeah.
So the weather in the Central Valley is perfect for tennis, but I can't imagine if I lived at the beach ever playing tennis other than at 5 a.m. in the morning, you know.
Yeah.
It would be impossible. So yeah, I think the Central Valley's got the perfect climate. And, you know, where I live, I'm kind of up a little bit from the valley bottom on the mountain. I'm surrounded by trees. I feel like I'm in the real Costa Rica, even though I'm just a few minutes from the town.
It's so true. I live in it. There's a gorge in front of my property, and you can hear the birds in the morning in the water, and the crickets and the sounds. And I realize that I'm 10 minutes from the center of San Jose, and that's how tropical it feels. We need to catch up to play some tennis for sure. That's something that's still on our to-do list. I remember playing tennis a number of years ago in Jaco. It was midday. It was about 35 degrees Celsius. So that's about just under 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity was about 80, 90%. We survived about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and you've lost half your body weight in sweat. It's incredibly hot. So you are right about choosing your hours if you are going to participate in sports on the coastal regions. As ever, Maddie, as I mentioned, the last question, I know we touched on it earlier. When people ask you, oh, you know, I'm thinking about moving to Costa Rica or traveling, but if I'm thinking about moving and making the big jump, what would your top tips be for those people coming?
Well, I think first of all, you definitely need to visit the country. And secondly, you need to, when you're doing that visit, really get into the mindset of living here and not being a tourist, because it is very different. You know, I mean, I do feel like I'm on vacation every single day of my life because I'm in Costa Rica. But, you know, there are things that I need which you don't need if you're coming here on a 2-week vacation. And, you know, I need to be able to take my kids to the dentist. And, you know, I do want to be able to buy, you know, more luxurious items in the supermarket, which you don't get in the small beach towns. So, you know, really try and get into that mindset of what is it like to live here, and, you know, make some local contacts, spend some time. Do not rush into anything in terms of buying a property. I hear so many people, you know, on Facebook saying, I want to come down and buy a house this weekend. And don't, you know, take your time, get some good local knowledge, meet up with someone you trust who can take you through all that, and even rent to start off with, I think, if you're considering property. But if you have kids, I mean, the school thing is really, really important. And there's a great range of schools here. But, you know, they're very, very different, each one of them, whether you're looking for a short-term school or a long-term school, if your kid's in, you know, elementary or high school, if they speak Spanish or not. There's a lot to consider. So, you know, talk through with somebody who knows about that kind of thing, and, you know, make sure you're making the right choice, because it's going to be crucial for the happiness of the whole family, really. Yeah,
really valid points. And it's not something that we necessarily discussed before, the importance of having someone you trust to ask some of these questions. Because that makes a massive difference, as well as obviously visiting, like you say.
Yeah, absolutely. Just making sure you've got the right local contacts for the right reasons, I guess.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Madeline, it's been an absolute pleasure for talking to you and picking your brain about
likewise
living here. I hope you're here for many more years to come.
Me too.
And I am looking forward to playing some tennis in a cooler climate with you very, very shortly. As ever, I'll leave all your contact information in the description box below for those watching on YouTube. And obviously they can reach out to you as well for those listening on other podcast platforms. But thank you very much for your time. Hopefully we'll get you on in the near future.
You're welcome. Have a great afternoon, Adam. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. Another really insightful conversation there, chatting with Madeline. It's really nice to see Madeline's original trip was only expected to be 1 or 2 years in Costa Rica, and that has since turned into nearly 10 years. And she's raising her kids here as well, and what better place to do it. As ever, if you guys want to reach out to Madeline, please double check the description box below if you're watching on YouTube for all of her contact information. And please don't forget to subscribe to follow along to never miss a weekly episode of your Costa Rica travel and living podcast. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like or a thumbs up, as that really helps us as well. So until next time, I'm your host, Adam Baker. Hasta la próxima.